Welcome in. It is week 12, and we are the Footballguys DFS Show. We have your full slate coming up this week for DraftKings and FanDuel, looking at cash games, looking at your GPP plays. We have 6 teams on bye. We always started out with asking how our DFS captain, Devin Knotts, is doing. How are you doing, Devin?
Average.
Average.
Last week sucked, but we're on to week 12.
It was rough last week with Russell Wilson was a player that I was on.
I tried to get too
really
cute. I tried to get really, really cute, and didn't work out so much. Drake May was like really good for me, but the rest of my lineup, Travis Kelce can kick rocks. 2 catches, 8 yards.
I'm upset with us about that Travis Kelce call because he projected so well. The number on the sheet was so good. But Buffalo does have a history of taking him out of the game. And
with Matt Milano and Jordan Poyer, though, like it's a complete.
I know, but maybe they just know it. Maybe he doesn't like the laundry. Who knows? But between that and Davis Allen, yeah, last week could have went a whole lot better.
And of course, we are joined with Phil Alexander, who is giving us his time before he takes over the Jets general manager job. So, Phil, how are you doing tonight?
Doing good. Oh God!
Let's hit the games of the week.
Be nice to me, Jeff. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy.
I'll trade you any day you want, buddy.
Games of the week. Let's go through. Phil, what are you looking for this week in week 12?
Well, I like this slate a lot better than last week's, and hopefully that is a fortunate thing. We still have a bunch of heavy home favorites like we did last week, but I think there's a couple more games that could go back and forth. First one on my list is Colts at Lions. We know the Lions are going to put up points. We saw Anthony Richardson come back, and it looks like he might be ready to carry the Colts offense a little bit. So that one could be a little bit of a seesaw battle. Cardinals at Seahawks looks like a close one with a fairly high implied total, 47.5. Seahawks are short favorites at home there. And then the last one that's high on my list for potential shootout would be 49ers at Packers. That one's kind of a coin flip. Could be more of a defensive battle, but I think I like what I've seen from the Packers. I think the 49ers defense is not quite what they've been in recent years. I remember some points in the playoff game between these two teams last year. So looking forward to that one. And then, like we say, the rest are these sides, these heavy home favorites that we could pile on. There's 4 teams that are at least favored by a touchdown and implied to score 27 points. So I'm sure that we'll be touching on a lot of those teams as we go through our cash game and GPP plays today.
Brock Purdy popped up with an elbow injury. If Brock Purdy misses the Packers and 49ers game, does that change how you're looking at that game at all?
Yes, because off the top of my head, I don't recall who Brock Purdy's backup is at this stage of the game.
I'm not sure if it's Josh Dobbs or if it's going to be Brandon Allen. I'm not sure which direction they would go.
Yeah, so that does, in either event, change my outlook on that game for sure.
Devin, do you have anything else you're watching for this week?
Nope.
I'm on quit watch because we saw last week, and maybe the Jaguars might have been a little quit watch. Maybe the Browns might have been a little quit watch. And so I think that, Phil, you talk about sides. We have the Commanders, maybe in a get-right game against the Cowboys off a long week since they had that Thursday night game. And then I don't know that the Patriots are at quit territory, but it does seem like the Dolphins are starting to get humming a little bit more this week. But before we move on, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop your questions for this week's slate. Drop your thoughts and tell me how I was wrong about Russell Wilson last week. And anything that you want to share and like and do all those things. But let's dive into our cash games now. And Devin, how are you building out your cash game quarterback?
It's 1 of 2 guys for me this week. And we could talk about quit watch in a second. But I think the Panthers might be approaching that. I think bad teams coming off a bye. They go on vacation. Like, how motivated are they to come back? It's sort of the situation the Browns had last week, where they had to bye the week before and then just didn't show up. If you can go up, I mean, pricing this week is weird because normally we're seeing guys in the mid to high 7Ks. Most expensive guy on the board this week is 7,000. So Jaden Daniels, if you can afford him, I think is a great play. If you can't afford him, God, we're going to regret this. Anthony Richardson, 5,600. I mean, look, Detroit has one of the best defenses in football, but they lost Alex Anzalone. They haven't had Hutchinson in a while. Losing your defensive play caller in the middle there, it's not going to be a game you're going to want to watch. It's very really dating myself, but Blake Bortles 2016-ish, where you close your eyes and he finishes as a top 5 quarterback. But I think he's at least intriguing. He looked better last week. And he sort of knows that in the Jets defense, I mean, say what you want about him. I know that we've been ripping on their run defense, and it is pretty bad, but 272 and a touchdown and 2 rushing touchdowns, I'm at least intrigued there. But to be honest, I'm probably trying to find a way to go up to Jaden Daniels this week, at least on DraftKings.
I call those hot dog quarterbacks. I don't want to see how it's being made. I just want to enjoy the end product. So, hot dog quarterbacks there. But Phil, do you have other ones? I know I've got Geno Smith on my board. Is that somebody that is on your radar?
It is. One of us has to do it, so I'll just go ahead and rip the Band-Aid here. We have to have a difficult Tommy DeVito conversation, don't we? Tommy DeVito is 4,000. In 5 career starts, he has gone at least 3x this salary in 3 out of 5, reached double-digit DraftKings points in the other 2. He did not have Malik Neighbors then. He does have Malik Neighbors now. He's playing the Bucs, who have allowed the most DraftKings points to quarterbacks. The last 4 quarterbacks to face the Bucs have scored between 25 and 35 DraftKings points against them. And the fewest they've allowed all year was that weird week 2 game where they beat Detroit, and Jared Goff had 13.78 DraftKings points. So that's the case for Tommy DeVito. The question becomes, can you live with yourself spending your actual US dollars on Tommy DeVito this coming Sunday? The answer for me is no. I feel like the answer for some people is going to be yes. What do you guys think? Are you doing Tommy DeVito to your cash game lineup? Is there any chance?
No, there's no chance. And I know why people will be intrigued. But if you're going to do that, you really can't find, I don't know, 1,500, 1,600 to go to Geno Smith or Anthony Richardson. I would rather take a chance on a punt wide receiver. I'd rather take a chance on a punt tight end. 1,500 doesn't save you all that much. If you wanted to just punt a position, in cash, I know he had a bad week last week, but go back to Kayshawn in New England at 3,500. I don't know. I just think the floor is so low for DeVito that, I remember a game last year against Dallas, I think it was, where I was live betting the heck out of under 90.5 passing yards. And it's just he had 17 through the third quarter. And so I don't know. I understand the Malik Neighbors point. He's just not a guy that it doesn't seem like the Giants are excited about him. I'm going to pass this week. If I lose money to Tommy DeVito, so be it. But 8 times out of 10, I feel really good about it.
That's where I'm at. So for me, it was are you feeling safe or do you want to get frisky? And Geno Smith is the safe play. And I almost don't even need to talk about him anymore because I think I say his name in this section every week. He's just going to get you between 16 and 18 DraftKings points at his 5,700. He just is. He's gotten to at least 16 and 80% of his games this season. So might not be a higher floor quarterback out there. And then if you're feeling frisky, that's where I was looking at Richardson. And personally, I think I am feeling frisky. His price only dropped by or went up by 300 after he dropped 29 DraftKings points on the Jets last week. He only ran for 32 rushing yards, which is pretty much his rushing floor. And the Lions have the best offense in the league. They're implied to score just about 30 here. If the Colts are going to stay in that game, or if they're going to be trailing in that game, it's going to be because the team is letting Anthony Richardson kind of do his thing. It's not going to be a conservative game plan. And Detroit actually allows the sixth most passing yards per game to their opponent. So, I think even if Richardson flops, you're talking 12 points. But unlike Geno Smith this week, I think he gives you 30-point upside and could help actually win your head-to-heads and help you place in those double ups.
Yeah, I think that's my favorite point there on Anthony Richardson. Of basically, he has the ceiling to be the number one quarterback on this slate. Tommy DeVito definitely does not have the ceiling to be the number one quarterback on this slate. And I think we'll move through to the other positions as well. Like Devin made a great point there, talking about that 1,700, and I'm curious on some of the other positions. Is it even, do you even need that 1,700 to try to? I don't know. I don't know if there's differentiators enough at the top potentially, but let's look at running backs now. And Phil, what are you looking at for running backs in cash game lineups?
Yep, going back to the well with Devon Achane, same way that I did last week. He is still too cheap, only 300 more than last week after he was wildly popular, probably a little bit too popular in tournaments. He didn't set the world on fire, but 20 and a half DraftKings points was just fine. His workload continues to look great. 17 carries and 4 catches against the Raiders. He was getting goal line touches. Raheem Mostert is just not involved. He's getting banged up. And the Dolphins are at home favored by more than a touchdown. And the Patriots defense is just a great matchup for opposing running backs, has been all season. The other running back position, I think, is up for debate a little bit. I do think that no, it's not. All right, this should be interesting then, because I think that the way salary breaks down, it's easy to go all the way up to Joe Mixon at 8,000. So that was my current plan. I came close to saying Kenneth Walker there. But again, because of the wide receiver pricing, I think we could come up with the extra coin. Tennessee's rush defense is a challenge, but I don't think Tennessee is going to overcome this game script with Houston favored by 8.5 at home. And I mean, Mixon is just different this year. He was like a grinder for years in Cincinnati. And now he's turned into that big play rusher receiver that at least I thought he was when he was coming out of college. He has yet to score fewer than 17 DraftKings points in every game he finished. And this sets up as a spot, I think, where he could cruise past 25. Got a couple more names that are viable, but I want to see what Devin's thinking.
Yeah, there's two guys for me. It's James Conner and Kareem Hunt. Seattle's run defense is atrocious. I mean, they've allowed 5 running backs to top 90 yards or more on the ground, 3 to top 100. They're allowing 5.1 yards per carry. And then I talked a little bit about the Panthers. I mean, they're very much on quit watch. Coming off the bye, we've seen the Patriots just run these games where they don't need to score a ton of points, but they'll hand the ball off to Hunt over and over again. And his price is really solid at 5,700. So, I mean, for me, I'm saving money at the running back. I understand the mix and play, but I don't know. Going up against Tennessee is a little bit scary. They've been pretty good all year, but I'm just targeting these bad defenses and just, moving on with my life. I mean, we saw against Tampa Bay where Hunt had 27 carries. Yeah, the last 2 weeks he's only had 14, but those were tighter games against a good Denver defense and Buffalo, who just kept the game tight. So I think they open up a lead. I think he gets 20 carries. I think he catches 2 to 3 passes, 80 yards and a touchdown, something like that. So I don't know. Hunt's probably my number 2, and then Connor's my number 3. But
so I like Brian Robinson Jr. too at 5,600 going up against Dallas. I think that it's in potential for 2 or 3 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns we saw from Mixon last week. I think that's very much in play for Robinson Jr. at 5,600 there. Phil, do you have other ones to put on your board?
No, you guys actually took the 2 that were in my also viable section. The only question I have about Kareem Hunt is Isaiah Pacheco's return sounds like it's looming, right? He'll be back this week.
Is it this week?
I think that's what I read. So here's the thing with that, though. I don't necessarily think that Isaiah Pacheco being declared active would hurt Kareem Hunt all that much, because you have to think, I mean, here Kansas City is sitting with one loss on the season. They got this guy coming off of a serious injury, the same one that like wrecked Tony Pollard for over a year. Are they going to want to like just give him his old workload back the first week back? I say no way. So to me, for Kareem Hunt, he almost becomes like a linchpin of GPPs on the slate, because I think if Pacheco's active, I think the sentiment might swing towards, oh, we can't play him because Isaiah Pacheco's back. Where in fact, for tournaments, that would be the best thing for his ownership. And in no way do I think that they're going to rush Pacheco back. I think he's cash viable and potentially a good play in GPPs, depending on how that ownership breaks down.
You know, just to remind everybody, we're recording on Wednesday night, and like personally, I don't see a point in bringing Kareem Hunt back or Isaiah Pacheco back this week against Carolina. You basically have a playoff spot locked up. You're significant favorites. If he does play, I would probably go with Brian Robinson over Hunt. I mean, for me, it's, you know, if I look at Mixon versus that 5,600 tier, that to me is the difference between Jaden Daniels and Anthony Richardson. So like, that's sort of the route I'm going. I understand the Mixon play. Like, I have no issue with it. I'm just going with a little bit more balanced approach this week.
Let's look at wide receivers now. And Devin, where are you hitting wide receivers this week?
Yeah, wide receivers. I mean, there's so many different options this week. I think that the most obvious play this week will be Jacoby Myers at 5,100. I think he's just too good of a price. I think Jawan Jennings at 56 is probably going to be in there too, especially if George Kittle, it sounds like he's banged up. He says he's going to play. How effective he's going to be, largely still unknown. But I think those two are like the first names that I'm clicking on. Myers is just, he's been consistent. Like it's nothing that's going to win you like massive contests. But, you know, last week was a bad week and a bad matchup, and he had 8.8 points, which is the lowest that he's had since week 2. So he's top 17 in 2 of his last 3, just getting targets, being a part of this offense. I like him a lot. And Jennings, I mean, I don't know what's going on with Debo, but he's just not a part of this offense right now. And McCaffrey, like, people are expecting him to break out, but like the last 2 weeks, man, I don't know. I just don't see him becoming this like monster running back. I think that they're still going to have to throw the ball in San Francisco. And we saw with Jennings last week where, you know, 10 for 91 and a touchdown, even if he doesn't score a touchdown and he catches, I don't know, 6 passes for 60 or 70 yards at 5,600 in cash, you're completely okay with that. So I think he's pretty safe. The third receiver, that's where you really have a choice, because it depends on how you want to build your lineup. I mentioned K-Shot for New England, really bad game last week, but he was still 4 for 33. And at 3,500, okay, it allows you to do other things. It allows you to pay up elsewhere. And if that's his floor, I'll certainly take that. Looking up a little bit, if you wanted to pay up, it's hard because I'm not playing Justin Jefferson in Chicago. 8,300 for Amon-Ra St. Brown is too expensive. Yeah, he's coming up off of a 42-point performance, but you're paying that at 8,300 as your price tag. I think if I'm paying up for one guy, I can't believe I'm saying this. If I'm paying up for one guy, CeeDee Lamb at 7,300 is too cheap. And I understand the risk with Cooper Rush, but, you know, 8 for 93 last week against Houston. He had a carry. This offense looked more than competent. So $7,300 just seems like too good of a price for a guy who's $300 more than Mike Evans.
I'm out on the Jacoby Myers play going up against Patrick Surtain with Gardner Minshew. That's what I'm going to avoid. But I hear you. I know that the numbers have pointed that direction. But again, Surtain is I'm just out there. But I hear you. I think other ones are a really good call. Juwan Jennings I think is a great call at 5,600. Phil, what are you looking for here in your lineup?
Yeah, I'm out on Jacoby Myers too, only because I played him in my cash game lineup last week ahead of Juwan Jennings, and that didn't work out so great.
Don't you think? Going back to the Surtain, like I understand the issue, but don't you think they'll just play Myers more in the slot, which Surtain like never goes to?
Well, don't they put Brock Bowers in the slot?
I mean, yeah, but Myers is in the according to ESPN, Myers is in the slot 40% of the plays. So I think there's ways to avoid Surtain. I hear your point, but at 5,100, I think it's just a pretty good price.
Yeah, I think he's in roughly the same spot that he was in last week, and I just put too many eggs in that basket, and I'm doing the thing where I'm letting recency bias kind of guide me, and I'm just staying away. But there are guys that I like better. Jennings was definitely one. I think you got to lock him in, even though the matchup isn't great. But 11 targets in both games since coming back from the injury, and pretty much wide receiver one in all games without Brandon Ayuk this year. The other two guys that I like are also in the mid salary range. Cortland Sutton, 5,800. He surprised me last week with his tournament ownership. It was very high. But I think that shows that people have caught on to the fact that he is like the only reliable player in that Broncos offense outside of Bo Nix. Since he put up a 0 in week 7 at New Orleans, which was rough because I had a lot of him then too. He's had 11, 10, 9, and 8 targets, 21, 26, 19, and 15 DraftKings points. He is a top 5 wide receiver over the last month in the DK scoring system. And this week's matchup for Denver is relatively soft. Against Vegas, it seems like a safe spot for Sutton given his recent productivity. And Calvin Ridley, another discount wide receiver one on a so-so offense, 5,700. Playing the Texans, again, not ideal, but they are easier to pass on than they are to run on. Over the last 5 weeks, they've allowed more than 25% more fantasy points, 2 wide receivers than league average. And there are games in that sample against the Cooper Rush Cowboys and the Aaron Rodgers Jets. Since the Hopkins trade, Ridley has a 32.5% target share. That is massive. He's got a pair of 25-point plus just blow-up games. And he would have had another last week against Minnesota, but he had a long TD called back on a penalty away from the play. So I think Ridley is playing really well right now, and that trio, along with Richardson, allowed me to spend up on the 2 running backs, HN and Mixon, and then you still have room if you punt tight end to flex in like a Brian Robinson or a Kareem Hunt. So I kind of like the way that build was flowing together.
Jackson Smith and Jigba, 6,300. What we've seen him put up over the last 2 weeks, I think is. No. Is just laughing because he's a Buckeye, Devin? Is that the joke here?
I'm not laughing. I'm not laughing about the play. He's fine.
Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, I could have started other directions, but yeah, he started there.
It's Jeff's DEI quota where he has to name a Buckeye on every show.
Hey, Curtis Samuel had a touchdown last week. I'm just saying. 5 for 15.
I'm not criticizing the play. Like I'm just saying.
That was actually a great
quota, and you have to meet it.
My best lineup had Samuel in it, and that was all you, baby.
Appreciate that, man. And then Roma Dunze at 4,800. Weather in Chicago might scare me a little bit, but 10 targets last week in that first game without Shane Waldron, 6 for 68. They're starting to get on track, maybe a little bit offensively, but I think the biggest thing there is they've really cut down they were playing like weird wide receivers instead of Odunze and just had weird rotations going on. They really narrowed it down to those top 3 receivers that we expect and Cole Kmet as their base personnel and their main personnel. Odunze, I think obviously the big play potential is there. and 4,800. And again, you give me 10 targets at 4,800 against the Minnesota defense that has allowed the most points to wide receivers of any defense on this slate. So got that going on.
Bears fans, you guys are lucky, because if that kick would not have been blocked, we would have spent this entire hour me gloating how I told everyone that they were overreacting. And instead, because of a stupid block kick, I don't get to do that. Thanks. But we're back this week. Chicago wins against Minnesota,
with Rome Odunze scoring a touchdown for the first time. And Caleb Williams has not thrown a touchdown in over a month. And it cost me.
Minnesota's been one of the worst defenses against wide receivers all year, so I do like it.
Yeah. Let's move to tight ends. And Phil, what are you looking at tight ends cash gameplay?
So a week after Davis Allen failed me at the site minimum, I did not want to go back to the $2,500 well, but again, the way that the lineup that I like broke down, you got two options at the bottom that I'm looking at. The first is Luke Schoonmaker. Dallas used a pretty even mix of Schoonmaker and Brevin Spann-Ford in Jake Ferguson's absence last week. Ferguson is just about guaranteed to miss this week's game with a concussion. But Schoonmaker ran 32 routes to Spann-Ford's 24, and he had 9 targets to Spann-Ford's 5. And earlier this year, when Ferguson was out with the ankle injury, it was Schoonmaker who more so filled that pass-catching role than Spann-Ford. 6 targets, 43 yards, and 10 DK points in that game. So he's had extended run twice this season. He's got double-digit DraftKings points at the minimum salary in both games. And by the way, like, he's a pretty impressive size-adjusted athlete. It's not like this is like plotting white guy tight end, like the generic cutout. He's a second-round pick from last year. So this is somebody who has the potential to kind of show something in this audition. And if you're not comfortable going all the way down, this one's probably not as good of a play as Schoonmaker, but Theo Johnson, 2,900, catching passes from Tommy DeVito. I know that it makes you a little bit queasy, but Tommy DeVito is going to be getting the ball out quickly.
I'm going to mute you.
We need a veto button.
We need to keep our retention rate for this show. Talking about Theo Johnson is not a way to do it.
Listen, six targets in each of his last 2 games.
What's the point? If you're going to play Schoonmaker, don't go to this Theo Johnson guy.
The Bucs are allowing twice as many fantasy points than league average over the last 5 weeks to tight ends. I mean,
he's going to throw for 72 yards. Like, what are we talking about?
I think he's going to get closer to like 190 to 200, and I think we'll be surprised that Theo Johnson. All right, don't play him in cash, but keep tabs on him in GPPs then as a pivot off Schoonmaker.
Fine. If you want to stack him with Tommy DeVito and get all the players, fine.
Phil's locking in his stack of the week. Tommy DeVito and Theo Johnson.
Don't play a guy named Theo in cash.
Man.
Hunter Henry, 4,000. He's just been consistent. I mean, was it 13? I just had it open and you completely wrecked me. We're talking about Theo Johnson. You could tell it's week 12 because we're a little slap happy, but 12 points or more in 5 of his last 6 games at 4K. Like, that's about as good as you can do. 6 for 63 last week. The only game that he really didn't perform was that Chicago game where they didn't need to throw the ball. And I think at 4K, he's about as safe as they come. 5 or more catches in 4 of his last 5 games. I don't hate paying up again. I think it's probably more of a GPP strategy. Bowers is really expensive at 63. It's another player that you're paying for that 40-point upside, but he does have 20 or more in 4 of his last 6, including an 18 and a 13 in the other 2 games. So his floor is really high compared to Travis Kelce, who we're not going to talk about that. Yeah, I mean, to me, it's Henry or Bowers. But if you did just say, like, you know what, there's a player up at the top, maybe I do love a Joe Mixon or I do love a Jaden Daniels or whatever, and I can't get there, Shoemaker's fine. I mean, 3 for 37, hope he catches a touchdown. Like, he's not going to kill you.
I'm curious
Don't
if
play
the
Theo Johnson.
Giants. I'm curious if the Giants are actually good against tight end, or if they just haven't played anybody with a tight end. Because I see Kate Otten at 5,500. We know what Kate Otten has been doing of late. I think there's a block here between. I mean, obviously Brock Bowers is there, but Kelsey, Trey McBride, and Kate Otten are all kind of in a row and sitting in a nice little group that have high upside. There's a player at 4,100. One of my favorite things, revenge game. Jonnu Smith. We saw 101 and 2 touchdowns last week. Some of that was a broken play. A lot of that was a broken play, but going up against the Patriots about league average against the tight end. But we've seen, I think that the Miami Dolphins will score some points on the Patriots is my expectation. And I think that might be if you're not going to go with Achane, that might be a low entry point for you to get into that Dolphins offense, because we've seen, I mean, he's over the last, since week 6, he's been tight end 5. And so it's happening. He's the wide receiver 3 there, more or less. But before we move on, I should have my thing up so I can read it. Make sure to head to footballguys.com/plans to become a Hall of Fame subscriber. Hall of Fame subscribers can get access to all DFS content for less than $20 monthly or $95 annually, but there's more. Right now, we have the Black Friday sale going on right now. This is going to be one of the very best prices of the year. It's your opportunity to lock in. You get next year's membership at a deeply discounted rate. Just hit those Black Friday sales and check out the merch shop as well, because we've got it loaded up. We've got new merch in that shop. And so make sure to grab your Football Guys merch, and hopefully we win you some money and you can turn around and buy a new subscription and some merch out of it. But let's move into GPP plays now. And Phil, what are you looking at quarterback for GPP plays?
All right. I'll see if I could rebound from Theo Johnson after being beaten into submission by you guys. Anthony Richardson at 5,600. I just want to point him out again because I think his ownership will be moderate, even though people are considering him for cash. And that's probably because no one ever knows who to stack him with. So 7%. I think that's pretty good for a quarterback that is being considered in cash games. And certainly stacking that game is something that I plan on doing. So I think Richardson is in play. But Baker Mayfield, 6,100. This is a top 5 quarterback in season-to-date DraftKings scoring, and he's priced at the QB 10. And I have him projected in like the 5 to 6% ownership range. So he's coming off of a pair of tough matchups against Kansas City and San Fran. He was missing his best weapons, but now the Bucs are off of a bye. He probably gets Mike Evans back this week, I think. He's been limited in practices so far. Jalen McMillan wasn't healthy heading into the bye week. You got to figure that he's feeling better than he has been in about a month. And Jeff mentioned that Kate Otten has emerged as a very viable target in the passing game. Tommy DeVito is probably going to put the Bucs in scoring position on his own a couple of times in this game. And Baker should be able to capitalize on some of those short fields. So I do like the Bucs. I do like Jared Goff again. What's different this week than last week? We just saw him break the slate with over 37 DraftKings points against an overmatched AFC South defense. And he's back in the same spot. He's at home. He's a big favorite. The defense is no good. Maybe it changes by the weekend, but I have a feeling he'll be in that 5% range. Is that where you had him, Devin?
Who is that?
Jared Goff.
Goff's lower than that. He's down at 2%.
Yeah, so there's a chance that he might be in total FU mode after that 5 interception game, and maybe he's still getting it out of his system after the 5 touchdown game last week. So possible that you just want to catch Jared Goff while he's on a heater right now.
I want to note on the Giants, a lot of times when we see these quarterback changes, teams will kind of be, especially if they've been losing, it'll kind of be between, well, let's be respectful about the old guy and let's not say anything, or you can sense there's some excitement about the change. The Giants, from what I've seen, they are angry because there's been some comments about, this is financially driven, and I think a lot of them believe that Daniel Jones is easily their best quarterback. And when you've got a team that has only 2 wins and they feel like their organization's quitting on them for the season, that Baker Mayfield.
And they don't have their all-pro left tackle.
Yeah, that could be 4 or 5 touchdowns there for Baker Mayfield this week. So I like that call quite a bit there, Phil. Devin, I caught you right as you're taking a drink of your get well juice, but what are you looking at this week for your quarterbacks and GPP plays?
Guy who's going to be 1% this week, CJ Stroud. I talked about Tennessee's run defense being pretty good. He's a pivot off of Joe Mixon, but you look at his home road splits, and I mean, Jeff, you'll know this. He's a guy that does not like to play in bad weather, and being at home in the Dome with Nico Collins back, there's certainly some upside there. It's easily stackable with both Collins and Calvin Ridley on the other side. Stroud hasn't been good this year, and hasn't thrown for 300 yards, but he's completing 66% of his passes at home, only 60% of his passes on the road. So I do think that he's a much better quarterback at home. Or I'm sorry, he has thrown for 2 games of 300 yards, including against Buffalo, both at home, by the way. So he's just a guy that I'm going to target when he's at home and fade him when he's on the road. Other than that, I mean, if you wanted to go down in the low range, Caleb Williams is due for a breakout game at 5,100. He's been better than his stats have shown. At least last week he was. But I still believe in the player. I still believe in his upside. I still believe in the receivers. Minnesota's run defense is elite. Their pass defense, not so much. So I think he's a guy that you could certainly target. And then, I mean, there's just a lot of garbage on here. Like, Kyler's going to be popular, but I'm not doing that. What Call of Duty came out like a couple weeks ago, and he doesn't want to play anymore. No, but he's just not running the ball as much as he was early on in the season. So early on in the year, he was running quite frequently, and more recently, he just hasn't been. So with very not great receivers, we'll just put it that way, but he's run for 25 yards or less in 4 of his last 5 games. So just not a guy that I'm going to target despite how popular he's going to be. I understand that the matchup is somewhat favorable and could go back and forth, but just not a guy. Drake May doesn't have the upside to me, but maybe to Jeff he does.
Patrick Mahomes, 6,800. We see sometimes when teams are deep in these undefeated seasons, they're getting asked about it constantly. There's some pressure mounting there. And then sometimes we see when that gets broken, then the pressures are lifted and you see some explosions. And I think against Carolina, it could very much be in play. Devin, you talked about early about the bye week. Coming off that bye week, we saw how the Browns kind of mailed it in last week. I mean, Mahomes could very well go off against Carolina at 6,800. I don't know where he's sitting in rostership percentage, but yeah, a low on Patrick Mahomes against Carolina Panthers seems interesting. Let's look at running backs now. And Phil, where are you looking at for your running backs for GPP plays?
Yeah, so I was just looking up what we know about Isaiah Pacheco as of Wednesday evening here, and it looks like Rap Sheet had said that his return is imminent. He was limited in practice today, and after practice, Andy Reid said we'll have to see as the week goes on.
That tells me he's not playing.
Yeah, it kind of does sound that way, but I point it all out again just to reiterate that if we get news that he's active, you should like Kareem Hunt a lot better in tournaments because chances are he might be active and not see a carry. He might get in for a series. Rushing him back to a substantial workload makes no sense if you're the Chiefs. So you're going to get Kareem Hunt at a lower ownership if people are scared of Pacheco playing. So you'd rather see him active, I think, for tournaments. Tyrone Tracy, 6,000. I like him either on his own or as a run back in Baker Mayfield stacks. The Giants are not planning on letting this Cutlets guy throw it all over the field. They want to run the ball. Tracy is their lead runner. And while Tampa Bay is the absolute worst defense against the pass, they've also been a plus matchup for running backs over the last 5 weeks. And DeVito, I think, is more likely to check down to his running backs than Daniel Jones was. Daniel Jones likes to tuck it and run instead of check it down. So just maybe with DeVito at quarterback, we'll be able to see Tracy finally flash some of those wide receiver skills because he was a wideout in college, as we know.
What do you have, Devin?
At what point do the Tampa Bay Buccaneers stop playing Rachaad White? I mean, Bucky Irving is a clear better back of the two. And, you know, he had 16 touches against the 49ers prior to the bye. He is a rookie, so, you know, they invested heavily in him. I think at 5,300 going up against a Giants defense that we want to talk about quit watch. They're the poster child this week for the quit. And I could see a big game from Irving. He's about 5% rostered at 5,300, which is pretty solid this week. I think Joe Mixon is a good play. I think it's so funny. People are finally out on Aaron Jones. Finally, after him being like the most popular guy for, I don't know, like 4 straight weeks. So I think actually 4% rostered. He certainly has upside every time he touches the field, even if it's a sloppy bad weather game against the Bears. The Bears defense has not been as good as it was early on in the season against the run, so certainly has an opportunity there. And then the last guy I'll mention, Jahmyr Gibbs. I don't know. I can never figure out the Lions in their rushing game, but I think at least at 7,300, he's going to be intriguing.
Christian McCaffrey, 8,500. We're seeing Christian McCaffrey usage. I feel like we are a touchdown or two away game from maybe it clicking with people's minds of Christian McCaffrey is still Christian McCaffrey. So that's hanging out there. If you wanted to pivot off that Brian Robinson Jr. play against this Dallas defense, you could play Austin Eckler. I think potentially. I think it could be there on short passes. And then Javonte Williams at 5,200 down at the very, very bottom. We saw all the excitement about Audric Estime last week and the benching of Javonte Williams supposedly 2 weeks ago. I mean, it certainly seems like it's going to be a hot hand approach at the minimum. If not, they maybe wanted to light a fire under Javonte Williams, but he looked a lot better going up against a Raiders team that quit watch. It's another one that I think you can chalk up there. So wide receivers, Devin, what are you looking at for your wide receivers in your GPP plays?
Yeah, I talked a little bit about CeeDee Lamb at 7,300. He's probably my top receiver this week. I think he's just underpriced. Going up against Washington in a game that I like somebody from this Dallas team, whether it's Rico Dowdle or Lamb, because I think Dallas is extremely competitive, which is why I like Jaden Daniels. So I expect this game to be a pretty high scoring one. Again, going back to the CJ Stroud thing, I think Nico Collins is in line for a big game at 7,600 right now. Nico Collins is projected to be about 5% rostered, which is just too low for a guy who prior to his injury was the number one receiver in football. You know, he's significantly cheaper than Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's 8,300. So I think you're getting a little bit of a discount there. Jackson Smith and Jigba, yeah, it's point chasing a little bit, but 24 points or more in each of his last 2 games. Certainly emerging as that number one guy in Seattle. We talked about Rome Odunze. He was on my list. I think he's in a really good spot, you know, paired up with Caleb Williams. So We've mentioned a lot of the guys that I do like, but I'll sort of leave it there. I mean, we've really covered like 12 receivers, I think, and it's basically the 12 that are on my list.
Phil, do we have the 12 on your list too, or do we got anything else still lingering out there?
Just a couple. The Dolphins wide receivers, Tyreek Hill 7,200, Jalen Waddle 5,300. Just judging on Devon Achan's ownership in tournaments and in cash games last week, I think he's going to be mega chalk again this week. And these wide receivers are great. They're two of the best in the league. They've just not been playing up to it. It really feels like a get right game is coming at some point. And if they're the ones that end up taking all that scoring and all of the big plays, which is definitely possible. You got the Dolphins implied for 27 points. So I would play either or. You could play them together with Tua, but I am looking there. And then, you could pay up. Devin mentioned Nico Collins. He definitely looks like one of the better options. So just keeping in mind that we were both kind of in the middle of the road when it came to wide receivers and cash games. If that ends up the common build, then immediately you're building in a different direction by going with a Nico Collins at 7,600, by going with Amon-Ra St. Brown at 8,300. And I did mention that I like the spot for the Lions again. You guys called out Rome Odunze. I'll give DJ Moore a shout out at 5,500. He looked a little bit more like DJ Moore usually does last week with Thomas Brown's first game as offensive coordinator in Chicago. And we already talked about targeting that Minnesota pass defense. And the last one that I've got here, I mentioned already too. It was Jalen McMillan at 4K. What if he was just unhealthy the last couple of weeks and now he's not?
Yeah. One more guy that I forgot to mention, and it's going to meet Jeff's quota. So get excited. Marvin Harrison Jr. The last 4 weeks, the Arizona Cardinals have faced the New York Jets, the Chicago Bears, Miami, and the Chargers. 4 very good pass defenses. And this is a guy who has topped 100 yards in 2 games this year. And he's taking on what should be a high-scoring game against Seattle. So I think if you wanted to run a pseudo Ohio State stack, and we're going to count Geno Smith in here because he's cousins with Jeremiah Smith, you could get Jackson Smith and Jigba and Marvin Harrison. And Jeff would be extremely proud of you.
You could get Terry McLaurin or Jameson Williams too, and really go with it. So
there you go.
And of course, we're gonna shoot some fish at the bottom of the barrel here. We Sterling Shepard revenge game 4,200 going up against the New York Giants, and so that's one that 72% of the snaps his last game for the Buccaneers, and you get Mike Evans back taking the top over, and Sterling Shepard working underneath for Baker Mayfield. Baker gets him into the end zone against his former team. Another revenge game, and another Buckeye, Noah Brown at 4,200 going up against Dallas, and kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel there. But we had seen Noah Brown kind of take over as the wide receiver 2 a little bit. He's been quiet the last couple of weeks, but Philadelphia has strong cornerbacks and strong against wide receivers. So that was a difficult matchup last week, but Noah Brown, I think, can get in the end zone against his former team. And that's about what I got with wide receivers. Let's look at tight ends. Phil, what do you got tight ends?
Tucker Kraft, 3,900. He's been quiet in back-to-back games, and the Packers had a bye mixed in there over the last 3 weeks. So I'm pretty sure the field forgot all about him. But before those last 3 weeks, he's been one of Green Bay's best big play threats. And I did mention that I think that the Packers San Fran game could be high scoring, provided Brock Purdy plays in that game. And I'm trying to figure out where the Packers points are coming from. And for me, I guess it just comes down to ownership. I mean, he's projected, he'll be below 5%. I'm certain of it. and he's exceeded a 4x salary multiplier in 30% of his games this season. That just makes him a great play for tournaments. We know he's got a ceiling. The other guy I like is a guy that you mentioned, Jeff, Cade Otton, 5,500. Because all of those tight ends that are on the higher end are clustered very closely in price, and McBride and Kittle, McBride, Kittle, Kelsey are all bigger brand names. I think Otton should go somewhat overlooked, probably 10, 12% in tournaments. And even if Mike Evans is back, I think it actually might help Otton. If anything, it should open things up underneath and in the middle of the field. And
you think he'll be that high?
I'm
at 3% right now.
I don't think it'll be that low. It's probably somewhere in the middle.
The issue that you have is that maybe I'm too high on Travis Kelce, but Shoemaker's at 13, Henry's at 10, Theo Johnson's at 6. So like that eats up 30% of your numbers right there. And then I have Kelce at 19, but that's going to come down. He's not going to be 19% rostered. And if he is, that's a terrible play.
That makes me feel better about myself that 6% of other people swallowed the blue pill on Theo Johnson. Let's hear it for those folks.
I didn't argue with the
Theo Johnson scores a touchdown here this week. Phil, I'm pulling for you. Let's get Theo in the end zone.
Let's get him in for 3. Who cares?
Do it.
Yeah. Travis Kelce, I have no interest in this week. I look at how he's getting there. It's through catching 9, 10, 11, 12 passes. And I just don't see a path where he has to have 14 to 16 targets in a given week. So I think his floor is way too low compared to the upside. You're really hoping on 2 touchdowns. I mean, that's really what you're hoping for, is that they feed him and get him in that way. But I don't know. I just don't trust. Like, Kansas City has had 2 games that they've won by more than 10 points or 10 points or more. That's it. They like playing these just like play with their food, slow it down type games. And I'm just not into that. I think Brock Bowers is a much better play, 7% rostered. He's been extremely consistent, like we've talked about. If you wanted to go cheap, not Theo Johnson or Luke Shoemaker cheap. It depends on how many lineups you're going to play. But if you're going to play, 10, having one with Sam Laporta like every week for the rest of the season might not be a bad idea. 4,300 is just too cheap for a receiver who's 15 yards a catch or something. So you need 4 catches for 60 yards and a touchdown, and he's crushing it in terms of value.
That was it was hanging out there, and I was just waiting for my chance.
There you
Sliding
go.
the Sam Laporta at 4,300. Nah, it makes me feel better that you call it out. But I think that one's an interesting one. Zach Ertz, we saw him bounce back a little bit last week, and certainly there was maybe some feelings in that game against the Eagles, but we saw that touchdown at the end of the game. Again, I really just want Washington's side going up against Dallas. I think that there's going to be a lot of points there for the Commanders this week. Let's look at our favorite stacks of the week. Phil, what's your favorite stack of the week?
Baker Mayfield, Jalen McMillan, Cade Otton, run it back with Tyrone Tracy, and then just play chalk around it. And since I already kind of talked about all of those names, I'll just throw a bonus one in there. Kyler Murray, and you could play him with either Marvin Harrison or Trey McBride. I have a feeling this might be the week that McBride gets off the skid with scoring a touchdown or 2 against the Seahawks.
What do you got, Devin?
I'm going to go Tua Tyreek. I just think that at some point we're going to see an offensive explosion against Miami. They should be able to, it's a solid pivot. It might not be my favorite stack, but certainly one that I like quite a bit. Achan right now is trending to be about 45% rostered. I don't know that it'll get that high, but that's about where we saw it last week. So I think he's going to be pretty highly rostered.
I like Anthony Richardson going up against the Lions, playing from behind with Josh Downs. We saw Josh Downs last week go for, was it like 80 some and a touchdown? I think we're
Twitter
on there.
told me Josh Down died when Richardson came back.
Well,
You're saying that there's not always truth on Twitter?
Week, so that was fun. So.
Should I move to Truth Social? Is there more truth there?
I don't know. I don't know where anything is now, but. And then you can follow that up with that Sam Laporta, bring back at 4,300. If you really wanted to get spicy, you can look at maybe a David Montgomery, bring back too, if you wanted to do that. But some points getting scored in that Lions and Colts game. Let's look at our favorite discount plays of the week. Phil, what's your favorite discount play?
Well, I was going to plant my flag on Tucker Kraft, but I think you guys have forced my hand. It's Theo Johnson week. Let's go, Theo. Bring it home.
What do you got, Devin?
I just realized my light is not on for this entire show.
That's why that setting cleaning up was turning you into a cartoon because you didn't have your lights on.
Yeah, that's why I have a giant shadow across my face. Anyway, favorite. We went back to Kayshawn. 3,500. He's going to get in the end zone this week. 5 catches, 46 yards, and a touchdown.
I'm doing the Sterling Shepard. Sterling Shepard, 4,200 with Baker. Baker gets him in the end zone against the Giants. Some good feelings there. Devin, let's send it home.
Week 12. It can only go up from week 11. We had some good GPP plays. My cracking FanDuel, and I tweeted this out. I'm sorry if you are an avid follower of that article, which I know a lot of you are. It was the worst one I've ever put out in the 10 years that I've been doing it. So, only way to go is up this week. Good luck, everybody.